and introduce Dr. Ruby from Sacred Heart University as our presenter today. Thank you, Maureen.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be able to share this information with the CPAC audience. I have a lot of respect for CPAC, having been a parent, or I am a parent of a student with dyslexia. Just to introduce myself in a more informal way, I started my career not in education, but rather as a dentist. And as many parents know, when you have a child who has special needs, it's sometimes time consuming. And I was inspired to change careers and become an educator and then continue on this path for the past 30 years. So I have seen what the power of parent advocacy and appropriate intervention support can do for children. As a special educator myself and a reading specialist and a former interim director of special education, I think I've seen it, the field from a variety of different perspectives. So I'm happy to share what I know with all of you. Today, we're doing the first part module. We're calling Module 1 of a 3-part series. And some of you who have been kind of living in the space of reading challenges, dyslexia, reading disabilities, special ed, may know some of the basics that we're going to go over today. However, I think in Module 1, we're titling it Models of Reading, Engines for Understanding. We want to make sure that as we move through this 3-part series, which could grow down the line if people need that, we want to start out with a foundation of understanding for everybody who would participate in these sessions or look at the recordings at another time. Because in order for us to understand the second module, which is assessment, we need to understand the basics from the first model. And you'll see if you're with us for the 3 sessions that the sessions build upon each other. So I thank you for being here, and we're going to start Module 1, Models of Reading, Engines for Understanding. So you can go to the next slide. So our focus today is pretty basic. We know that children need advocates to support them while they are going through their learning trajectory, while they're in school, and while they are on their personal journey to become the leaders of the world of tomorrow. You know, it's if you see it on memes, you hear people say, you know, these are the people, the children who are in school now are the people who are going to be taking care of us when we're older. And so we need to make sure that we have a really strong cadre of people who are going to be caring for us and making decisions about us, both in government and in our personal lives. And this journey that we are on together to become literacy ambassadors and change makers for our students, whether we're parents or teachers or school administrators, specialists of any kind, really begins here with the basics. So we're going to look at the basics. There's a language. There's a language to what everybody's calling the science of reading. There's a language to special education. And so we're going to be going over some vocabulary, because it's really disheartening to be a parent and go to a school meeting, whether it's a general ed school meeting or a PPT meeting, and people are throwing around all this vocabulary, and we don't always know what it is. And I can tell you that as a beginning teacher, I wasn't a special educator to start out with, and I would go to PPTs, and even I didn't know what all the vocabulary was. So we're going to take a look at some vocabulary so that we can look at 3 models of reading. The reason we're going to look at 3 models of reading is because we all learn differently. And this is a way of me differentiating what we need to learn from this module. And additionally, to see that when people talk about one of the 3 models, they're really talking about the same thing. And it's being presented and shared in a different way. And models, as we'll see, make it easier to understand complex content. We are going to look at and question, so what is the whole point of learning to read? And we can answer that very quickly now, but we're going to go into it in depth later on. The goal of reading instruction is not just to lift the words off the page, which seems to be a barrier for many children in the younger years and dyslexics as they get older if they haven't received the appropriate instruction. However, that learning to lift the words off the page to decode is really the simpler part of the reading process, because the goal of reading instruction is to comprehend. And so there are a lot of pieces that need to be in place so that we can become readers who can pick up text, and whether it's in our hands or it's on a screen, and go through the words and understand what the meaning was to learn. So I'm calling this, this is like a journey. So all aboard, we're gonna move on and take a look at this. You can go to the next slide. So just like you should be seeing in your children's schools, or as we as educators try to do, we want to know what the learning targets are. So that's always a good question if you're in a meeting with an educator, like what are the learning targets for my child? Well, the learning targets for us as adults in this hour that we're going to spend together are threefold. And so describe the goal of reading, learn the vocabulary that is used in talking about reading, and the very essential key fundamental points about learning to read, and then looking at those three models. So at the end of this presentation, those are the things that I'm hoping that you all come away with. You can go to the next slide. So Dr. Seuss, I'm not going to get into the controversies about Dr. Seuss. Let's just be unbiased and look at this little quote from him and see the wisdom in it. He said, "The more you read, the more things you know. The more that you learn, the more places you'll go." And that's a very succinct way of talking about the goal of reading. The goal of reading is to comprehend written language. And the reason we want to be able to comprehend or understand written language is because that's how we learn about the world. If you can read, you can go on any journey. If you can read and you want to learn how to fly an airplane, you can get a book on how to fly an airplane. If you want to learn about a foreign country, you can get a book about that foreign country. If you want to just have an experience of wonderment, awe, and fantasy, you can read novels where you'll go to places that aren't even real. So reading is just, it's almost magical what it does. And Dr. Seuss really captures this in this quote. So you can be entertained, you can answer questions. I mean, how many of us haven't, think about something? It's almost a bad habit now, but I do it anyway. Every time I think about something I don't know, I pick up my phone and I ask a question in Google and I get the answer. I don't know if it's accurate, but I can check on that later. But that is just something that was like Star Wars 30 years ago, that you could just punch in a question and you could read the answer immediately. So students who can't read, adults who can't read, can't participate in the way life is today with technology. Reading is a gateway to the future. Reading is a gateway to economic security. Reading is a gateway to healthy lives, because you don't have good health insurance if you don't have a job, and it's very hard to get a good job if you can't read. So Dr. Seuss was saying a lot more than he knew he was saying when he wrote that quote. And so I think it should be something that we make a bumper sticker to remind us of how important reading is. So moving on and looking more deeply at what's behind his quote, what's so important about reading? Barack Obama, I probably stole from him when I said that reading was a gateway, said that reading is the gateway skill that makes all other learning possible. It's very difficult to think about anything that you could want to study or learn about and remove reading from the equation for typically developing humans. So it's a foundational skill for success in both school and in our day-to-day living. It supports us in how we perform, and this is academic and also employment-wise, in the sciences, social studies, and math. Part of the problem that students have with math, especially if they have a reading challenge, is that math has its own language. And then you have to be able to read it. So you're functioning in two different languages, English and the vocabulary of mathematics. By being able to read, you can build your vocabulary, because there are three ways that we typically learn vocabulary, and that is by direct instruction, me teaching you about the meaning of the word. Indirect instruction, where I'm teaching the meaning of the word by way of using it in my speaking or my teaching, and then by wide reading, we pick up vocabulary. And so vocabulary is absolutely essential for understanding, for communicating with others, whether you're communicating through what you write or what you read or what you speak. And vocabulary is critically important to higher level thinking. And the other thing about reading is, and I, at the university that I work at, Sacred Heart University, I have the position of being the endowed chair of social, emotional, and academic leadership. And so I think about social, emotional components of being human all the time. And reading helps students develop empathy. And that leads to compassion. And by reading and studying different characters, we come to understand the different perspectives. This could be in fiction or nonfiction. When you're reading, if you're reading in a history book and you're looking at two sides of an issue, you can understand the perspectives of people when you can be a deep reader. You can learn about different cultures and their experiences. You can learn about emotions. And like I said, when I started this bullet, it helps you develop compassion. So empathy is understanding the feelings that somebody else might have, but compassion is actually acting on it. And so in our world, we want people who have empathy and compassion, and we can learn that through reading. So at the bottom of the slide, it says, strong reading skills are essential for success in jobs, in college admission, and just in life to communicate and comprehend. Okay, we can move on. So it's not easy to learn how to read. Our brains are not, when we're born, we don't have a reading center in our brain. Reading is a fairly new skill for humans, and it's complex. And it's an active process where we're making meaning. So the goal of reading, as I said in the beginning, is to comprehend and understand what's read. If you do not understand what you're reading, if you're just pulling words off the page, reading is very frustrating. It's boring. It's considered an aversive, something that you don't want to do. So being able to comprehend what you read is important from the get-go, from when children start to read. And it continues throughout life. And so in order to we talk about all the time, you hear things like the joy of reading. We want children to find joy in reading. I would submit that I agree to that. But nobody finds joy in reading when it's challenging. And if you think about the things that we do as adults, if something is really hard for us, and I'll use this quick example, I had a friend who was a beautiful basket weaver, and she taught basket weaving at actually the Guilford Handcraft Center in Guilford, Connecticut. And her work was so beautiful. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. And so I signed up for a class. It was hard. It was so hard. I was not good at it. I was fumbling through it. And so do you think that I wanted to go home and do the homework that she gave us to complete the work that we had started for the first lesson in that basket weaving? Absolutely not. It was hard and it was not pleasurable for me. So I didn't do it. I ended up being a basket weaving dropout. I just could not do that. So the point here is that if you are not comprehending what you read, if you're stumbling through the words and nothing's making sense, you're not going to become an enthusiastic reader. You need to be taught a lot of different skills, which is why we're going to be going through these 3 models, because it's not just a quick fix when you're having a challenge. And students have to be able to not only learn those skills and strategies, but they need to know when to use them, and they need to be fluent and flexible in them. So we read to understand and learn, and we need to understand how students learn to understand and learn in reading. So now we're going to move to the vocabulary. So I say a little vocabulary and you're going to say, lady, this is not a little vocabulary. So, but it sounds nice, a little vocabulary. There are certain areas of reading. We talked about word recognition, that's lifting the words off the page. Language comprehension, that's understanding language. And I'm going to break those 2 things down first, those 2 categories. So word recognition. Word recognition literally means eyes on the page and recognizing what the words are that are written there. In order to recognize words, there are some basic skills that we need to address, and they all have vocabulary. So there's phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, decoding, alphabetic principle, and sight words. So we're going to go through all of those individually. The language comprehension piece is also important. And it's not just, oh, comprehension. You have to understand background knowledge, vocabulary, language structure, verbal reasoning, and then what we call literacy knowledge. And the other 2 big words in this vocabulary glossary that we're going to come to know very well are fluency and reading comprehension. And so let's take a look at some of these in a little bit more depth. We can go to the next slide. So word recognition, phonological awareness. Phonological, think about phono, like phone, okay, like hearing, like sound. So phonological awareness is all about the sounds in language. And different languages have their own sounds. So in the English language, we probably have one of the more complex sound systems when we start to figure out how we're going to represent those sounds in our writing. But just basically, we can think about phonological awareness as having the word level. So we know that we know that there are words in sentences. When we say, I like ice cream. As an adult, we know that there are 3 words in that sentence. But young children, until they've actually been taught that, don't know that. I like ice cream. It's just like one big stream. So there's the word level. There's the syllable level of a word. And on this depiction that I have on the slide, it's knowing like that baby has 2 parts to it. Baby, 2 syllables. I'm not expecting you to like take a quiz after this. I just want you to have the basics and have this as a reference. And then onset and rhyme. This rhyme that I'm talking about here is not rhyme like, fast, past, things that sound the same. This RIME is a part of a word. So an onset is the beginning and the rhyme is the ending. So like in the word map, the M is the onset, is the onset, and app is the rhyme. Phonemic awareness. This is the part we really need to know about. Phonemic awareness is when we can identify different sounds in a word. And it's kind of artificial in a way. So the word cat has 3 sounds in it. K, a, t. this is where the action is for our kids. Because in order to read a word on a page, you need to be able to see those letters and know what the sounds are that they represent. And there's new research out on this particular area of learning to read. And it really came into focus in journals and whatnot during the COVID period between 2019 and 2021, because we used to spend an inordinate amount of time teaching everything that's underneath that umbrella. And what we now know is that we don't need to spend half an hour a day in kindergarten and part of first grade teaching all of these things in under the phonological awareness umbrella, because that phoneme awareness level is where the action is for kids. And that's where we need to spend most of our time. And we'll talk about that because it'll be important when you look later on at what is being taught to your child in school. So a little bit more vocabulary on word recognition, the alphabetic principle. Hopefully we can transition right to this, that words are made up of letters, and the letters don't make sounds. Letters are just inanimate representations. They represent the sounds that we hear in words. So the alphabetic principles, when kids are learning the sounds, they should also be learning what letter represents those sounds. And English is a little bit harder than Spanish. Spanish has a more one-to-one relationship. English, we have sounds that can be represented by different letter patterns. Like think of the sound in the beginning of fish. That can be represented by an F. It can be represented by a PH. It can be represented by an OUGH. It can be represented by two Fs. That doesn't happen in Spanish. So our second language learners, when they come from a background of speaking Spanish into learning English, it is a really uphill climb. It's a steep learning curve because English is very different in how it represents the sounds. I want to talk on the next slide about a phrase that you may have heard, and you can go ahead. And it's sight words. Okay, so many of you have seen lists of words that are called sight words. And what a sight word really is a word that we recognize instantaneously. So recognized is a sight word for me. Vocabulary is a sight word for me. So we have, when we're good readers, we have very large sight word vocabularies. Sometimes you get lists of words from school that are called sight words. And what these really are more high frequency words, words that commonly occur in books. And students haven't learned that relationship between the phoneme and the letter. We're going to call letters graphemes, the phonemes and the graphemes, to be able to read the word. So I'll give you some examples, like the word that. That we can decode because we know that TH represents the sound, and then we know at that. But a child in kindergarten is going to see the word that frequently in texts that they might be reading. And they haven't learned that the sound that TH represents. And so they have to become, they're a high frequency word that needs to be taught and before the child has the skill to decode. So there's a little bit of confusion, and I'm not trying to make it worse, but there's a little bit of confusion about what the meaning of sight words is as compared to what we would refer to as high frequency words. Okay, and we can move on. When we get to language comprehension, you can go back one slide. Yes, thank you. I'm on language comprehension background knowledge, number 1. Thank you. So background knowledge, there's a lot of buzz right now in the reading journal world and on some podcasts, if you listen to podcasts about background knowledge. There was a story, it was actually a research article many years ago that said that students who knew a lot about baseball but were poor readers, challenged readers, were given a story about baseball, and students who were really good readers but didn't know anything about baseball were given the same story about baseball. And the conclusion was that the students who knew a lot about baseball but really weren't the strong readers did better on the tests of reading comprehension. Now, at some point, somebody's head should have went clunk. That didn't make any sense. The truth is, if you have background knowledge about baseball and somebody asks you questions about baseball, you're probably going to be able to answer the questions better than somebody who doesn't know anything about baseball. I don't think we need to do like research to figure that out. But what is important is to know that whatever you bring to the text, if you're a reader, is going to help you understand that text better. So experiences that you know about. And that's why it's really important for us as parents, whether our children are good readers or not, to talk to them, to if we can take them to parks, and we can use language to, even when we go to the grocery store, instead of just having a young child in a cart and plowing through, having a conversation like, oh, look we're going to buy an eggplant. This eggplant it's purple and it's smooth. Feel the skin. Okay, put it back in the basket. But using language to develop some background information for students. Reading will help you build your background knowledge. And the new information that we get, so thinking about Dr. Seuss, the new information we get is filed in our brains as background knowledge. But if we have some knowledge about a subject, we're going to comprehend. So we're all good readers, and we're reading a book about weather. We're probably going to understand that book if we have the vocabulary. But we can all be good readers and be given a book about physics and be able to read the words, but we're not all going to have the same comprehension. However, if I gave you a little bit of a pre-lesson on basic physics, preempting what we're going to be going into, and you were a good reader, you would have a better comprehension after you completed that reading. So background knowledge is important. We're going to go to number 2. I already talked about vocabulary, so I'm not going to beat this drum too hard, but I like to call vocabulary the currency of comprehension. It's how you pay for your comprehension, by knowing the words. So just reading the words, saying them out loud, if you read out loud, if you don't know what they mean, it's going to be pretty hard to understand what you've read. So knowing the meaning of a word, if you know the meaning of a word in your head, you know it from oral language, there's very strong research showing that when you come to that word in text for the first time, you're able to decode it more readily than if you never knew that word. So we learn vocabulary from reading. And we'll go to number 3. Language structure. Language structure is about how the words are put in order in our language. So the way the words are put in order in English is very different from how they are put together in Spanish and other languages. And so there are rules for how we create sentences. And this is something that I personally believe, this is an IMO in my opinion, we need to do a better job with in our schools for all students, because we somehow ask them to write 3-paragraph essays and 5-paragraph essays, but in not all places are children taught the language structure and practice with writing different types of sentences. And there are some districts in Connecticut that I've worked with that are actually working on this now. And so we're talking about 2 other words that I'm not going to go into, but you see a little chart, the syntax and the semantics of language. So you may come across those terms. We're not going to go into them deeply here. What I want people to understand is that understanding how words are put together changes the meaning. How punctuation is used in sentence can change the meaning. Like if I had this sentence that said, let's eat grandma, let's eat, comma, grandma, that would be like, let's eat grandma, we're asking grandma to come eat. But if I didn't have the comma there and it said, let's eat grandma, I don't think anybody wants to eat grandma. So the syntax and semantics is really important. And we can go into that at any other time if you're interested, but it's a very big subject. And so now we'll go to number 4. Verbal reasoning. Verbal reasoning is tremendously important. It's very hard to think without words. Verbal reasoning is all about how we get to higher order, higher level thinking using words, understanding how to logically use language to solve problems. And so parents, I think this is important. I am a victim of this. You know, when kids start talking, they start asking you why. They're curious. Everything that happens, they want to know why or why not. And after a while, sometimes we get annoyed with that. And we say, stop asking questions. So children are naturally inquisitive. Their brains are working. They're trying to get more and more information and they're asking for it. And then we shut them down. And by the time they get to school, they're not asking questions anymore. And so they become passive in terms of their thinking. They stop. And this has been, well documented. But verbal reasoning, that always questioning and wanting to know why, is critical to understanding the world. And so verbal reasoning is critically important to make sure that students are advancing in that area. Okay. So now we're up to literacy knowledge. And this is really about understanding the different types of texts that there are, knowing about how books work. And we can really advance our children, not just when they're little, but when they're grade school kids and middle school kids. Kids love to be read to. And when we read to them, it's not just opening up the book and just reading through to get it done. It's about really explain to them, oh, this is a mystery. This is a fairy tale. This is a nonfiction. This is a true story about giving us information about butterflies and whatever it is you're reading. But when the kids are little, we're teaching them about the front of the book and the back of the book and how to turn the page. And this is a picture and these are words. And then we're pointing so they see which way we go. Kids are great. They take it all in. But they need to know a lot about how books work. And that may sound silly, but you can talk to teachers in schools across America. Some students come to school and they don't know how to hold a book. They don't know how to turn the pictures. But as your children get older, helping them understand that there are different genres. There's fantasy, there's mystery, there's, they're all on the slide. So that's an important thing, and that's language comprehension. Okay. The next one we have is fluency. And fluency is a goal. Fluency, I have some examples up here. When we first start riding a bike or driving a car or playing the piano or playing baseball or reading, we are not fluent. We're beginners. And so we shouldn't expect young children to read like good readers. And they get told that that's what good readers do. No, good readers are people who have practiced for a long time and become fluent. And so in the beginning, being choppy is acceptable because we're just learning. And that's one of the reasons why we don't do oral reading fluency assessments on kindergartners, because we don't expect them to have oral reading fluency. It isn't until, and we'll talk about this more in depth next time, but we don't do typically oral reading fluency assessments until the middle of first grade, because it takes that long to learn how to ride your bike, drive your car, play your piano, play baseball, and read. So that's what fluency is all about. And finally, reading comprehension. And I've said it before, that's the destination. That's the goal. And comprehension is understanding what you read. So now we're going to talk about models. You can go to the next slide. And we use models to help us explain the world, to show us information in a way that's more easily digestible. And I have 3 examples on here. A new school building. If anybody's ever been in a town where they're building a new school building, the architects come in with this big model so that they can show you where everything is, so that you can conceptualize, you can see, you can visualize what this new school is going to look like. It could be a hospital, it could be a hotel. It's for planning. Okay. When we're studying the concept of the earth, big place, we have a globe. A globe is a model. So we can show whoever it is we're working with where different continents are, where oceans are, where anything we want to show them on the globe. When we're studying anatomy in grade school, even in medical and dental school, we have models to be able to conceptualize, to visualize, to help us understand what is in the human body. So that's the point of models. So we can move on, and I'm going to show you a slide with the 3 models of reading that we're going to be talking about, and then we're going to go into them. So we have the simple view of reading, the rope model of reading, and then the cognitive model of reading. You can go to the next slide. Now, the simple view of reading is not so simple. And there's nobody you can click. It starts with a formula. This formula, don't get freaked out. If you don't like math, it's not mathematical. It's reading, word reading times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. What is that saying? You can click again. It's saying that reading comprehension is equal to the product of word recognition and language comprehension. So you need to be able to decode all those things that we talked about. You need phonemic awareness, alphabetic principle, etc. And you need to have language comprehension. We just talked all about that in order to be able to have reading comprehension. And so you can't have one and not have the other. You can't have a little bit of one and a little bit of the other. You need to be competent in word reading and decoding, and you need to be competent in language comprehension in order to have reading comprehension. So that's the simple view of reading. Please, it gets criticized. Oh, what about fluency? What about this? What about that? You know, when we look at a model of a school building, we don't say, what about the river? You know, we know that it's a simple model. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Oh, this is just showing that it's all of everything. You have to be very proficient. 1 times 1 is 1. If you have anything less than 1, it's not going to come out to 1. So underneath, now we can unpack this a little bit. Underneath word recognition, you already can guess what we have. We have phonological awareness, phonics, or alphabetic fluency, alphabetic principle, and fluency. And subsumed under language comprehension, we have understanding what's being spoken to us on vocabulary, language concepts, the syntax, the semantics we talked about, and then communication skills. And that's going to, if we have that, and we're taught that, and we put it together, and we become fluent, we'll get to reading comprehension. You can go to the next slide. So now Scarborough's reading rope really blows this up into a bigger picture where we can see the 2 strands of reading, the language comprehension strand on the top and the word recognition strand on the bottom. There's nothing different than what we've already been talking about. Background knowledge, vocabulary, language structure, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge all go into that language part of the rope. And then on the bottom with the decoding, we have phonological awareness, which has phonemes in it, decoding the alphabetic principle, and sight words or familiar words. So if you see what happens, each one of those strands needs to be addressed in instruction. And you can see that they're loosely positioned as we're learning them. And they become tighter and tighter and tighter, which is representing the increase in a student or an adult's automaticity or fluency with being able to use them. And they become, for the language level, they become increasingly strategic. That means that they know when to look for vocabulary to make sense. They know when to have to think about and ask questions, verbal reasoning. And so they become strategic in using the skills, and they become automatic in being able to code. And then you can see that when that comes tightly together around fourth grade, the end of third grade, fourth grade, when we're on the right trajectory, we become skilled readers. So that's the rope model. You can advance. And this is the original. I put this in here because this is the original picture. And since we're in Connecticut, we can tell this little story. Hollis Scarborough, who developed this rope model in 2001, as the story is told, she happened to be visiting Connecticut because she did some work at Yale at Haskins Lab, and she was at Mystic Seaport, and she was on a tour, and she was in one of the Mystic Seaport buildings, and there was rope on the floor, you know, ship rope. I don't have the right terminology. I need to improve my vocabulary, but it was laying there, and this like image came to her, and this was her original drawing. So it's become very pretty now in 2024, but that was the original rope. Okay, and we can move on. This is our third model, and it's called the cognitive model. And this was originally designed by McKenna and Stahl, and then myself and colleague Ann Anderberg modified it a little bit. And what we did was we put in this big orange box that's on the left, and we called it target language proficiency because we are working with multilingual learners. And the original beautiful design of the cognitive model really didn't directly address that. So if you can see over on the right, what's our goal? Right, reading comprehension. But in order to get to reading comprehension, we need to have all the skills that are in what looks like blue. Sometimes things look different when we show PowerPoints, but at the top, the blue strand, we need to have phonological awareness, print concept, knowing how books work. We need to then have decoding and sight word, what people are calling sight word knowledge. We need to be fluent when we're reading in context, and we need to have automatic word recognition. The yellow, what looks like yellow could look like salmon to you, is the language comprehension part. And that's the vocabulary and knowledge about different text and the text structures, the semantics and syntax, all those words that I threw at you, and background knowledge. And we put this orange box here saying target language proficiency because those two strands could vary in different languages. The sounds, and the alphabet relationship, and then in yellow, how the syntax and the semantics, how words are ordered in sentences. So that could be, we need to be aware of that as educators, because if we have children coming who speak a different first language than English, this could be an area of confusion that we need to consider. And then the bottom strand, which looks pinkish purplish on my screen, is this the strategic knowledge, like knowing when to do what. Setting a purpose for reading. Why am I reading this? I'll give you this quick story. I was not a good student in US history in high school. I loved the teacher. I loved the people that sat around me. We fooled around a lot, but I was not a big fan because I didn't really like to memorize dates and guys on horses crossing rivers or whatever they were doing. And I didn't really know what the point was. But if somebody had said, so when somebody said to me, tonight, read a page 129 to 156, see you tomorrow, Like I did it because I was that kid, but I just kind of read through it. I didn't get much out of it. But if somebody had set what this is, setting a purpose, a general purpose and a specific purpose, if somebody had said to me, read those pages tonight and be on the lookout for this. And here's a graphic organizer for you to fill this in, because tomorrow we're going to have a debate. Well, now I'm hooked, and now there's a purpose for doing it. So setting a purpose for reading, knowing different strategies, which we're not going to go into today for reading, and then having what we call, so having strategies is one thing, but then having strategic knowledge, knowing when to use those strategies is a different thing. And that is not in an orange box, because you do that no matter what language you're speaking about, because that's what goes on in your head. Okay, now we can go to the next slide. And when we look at this slide, this is what we're going to be doing next. Because what I have used this for is to create a cognitive model of assessment. In order to get to reading comprehension, we need to have all those pieces. That's why way back I said it was complex. Learning to read is complex. All of these pieces need to be taught, and then our brains get reconfigured, and we put everything together, and it takes years to do that. Not just kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. All the years that come before a child comes to kindergarten, it's where language development, background knowledge, and all that vocabulary is all happening. But we need to be able to assess all of these areas to find out where children are having the barrier. And then we need to be able to remove that barrier through instruction. And teachers are really so empowered. The research is clear that through good instruction, we change both brain architecture, how the brain looks if you were to take it apart, and brain function. How do we know that? We know that through MRI work that's been done. Doctors have to use drills and scalpels and lasers to change brain, not us. When your child has a great teacher who understands how to teach reading, or when you're a teacher who knows how to teach reading, you change brain function and brain architecture. I don't know what's more powerful than that. I can't think of anything. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. And so we're going to talk about that model and how assessment is not a four-letter word. It is not a bad thing. How do you know what kids know well and what they need to talk about if you don't know about all those components and how you can check for them? That's why data, and data is a plural word, data are so important. So now that we've looked at these components of reading, we're going to look at how we can assess how the teaching that they're getting is impacting them. And we're also going to talk about how he's making progress just isn't enough. We need to know how much progress, because you can make progress. And if you graph it all out, you can say, oh, by the time he's 42, maybe he'll be at the end of where he's supposed to be. But that's not what we want. So our children's data tell a story. And what we really need to ask ourselves is a good one. So that's what we're going to look at next time. I thank you for listening to this. I hope that I didn't go too fast, but we can take some questions, and just thank you for the opportunity to present this.
As we open the floor for questions, I'm going to launch our poll, which just asks people a real quick question about their learning. Take 1 second. So I encourage people to fill it out. But in the meantime, if anybody does have a question they'd like to unmute and ask, please feel free to do so. Everybody knew everything already.
Hopefully there was a lot of basics. If you're in this space and you're a parent or a teacher, but this is, I really think that we needed to all get on the same page.
Oh, I see Renee has a question. Renee, please feel free to ask.
Hi, great. Thank you. Thank you, Maureen, for
Oh, you're
that
welcome.
great first part. So I don't know if you'll get in deeper in the next couple of sessions that you'll do, but you're ending with talking about looking at the data, making progress, how much progress.
Mhm.
Is there a way for families to be requesting that data? You know, of course, on the IEP, right, it'll have how often they're collecting data, and you'll look at the progress reports, but you know, really looking at the data, is there maybe an easier way to see it graphed, or really how parents can see? Because when you get it in a report with all the numbers, and you average, above average, below average, and connecting the parts, so parents are trusting that, no, they're making enough progress, or they're making good progress.
So there are actually, yes, the answer is yes, 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 yes. There are actually charts that tell you, for example, an oral reading fluency. There, I can get, that's a great question, because I'll make a note to get this to provide. There are charts that tell you exactly how many correct words per minute a child should be increasing over a week. The data, you know, I know what you're talking about with data, because I just got a letter from the IRS. I don't know what it said. I just had to send it to an accountant to figure it out. And I can read, but I don't have the background knowledge to read that. So if you are getting data in a narrative, and they're just, we're just putting numbers in there. I mean, I write reports, I write that kind of a report, but then it needs to be in a chart form and a graphic form, so that you can actually see. Because if you look at numbers, and one, it was 14, and then it was 16, and then it was 18, that sounds like making progress. But if that line, so there's a the trajectory of learning, if the slope, this is where algebra does come in. I keep seeing those memes. Oh, another day where I didn't use algebra. Well, you use it if you're if you're a parent of a child with special needs. So I don't know if you can see my pen, but if the slope is flat and they're still making progress, that's awesome. But if the slope needs to be like this for them to catch up to their grade level peers, that is not enough progress. And I used to love what Roland Good said. Roland Good was one of the people who developed Dibbles, which is now Acadians, and he talks about go upness, because he figures that everybody can understand that. And he says, if there's not a go upness, the child needs a different form of instruction. Okay, so I'm going to address that. If there are questions, like after that second session, if there are more specific questions, getting in touch with CPAC, they can get in touch with me. I can get you more in-depth answers. But I go to PP. So I just, by transparency, I was a parent advocate for many years. And, you know, I'll just be honest. I mean, I'm on both sides of the fence. People did not like to be asked for graphs of student work on student performance. But now there are wonderful tools that do that for us. And I will send this information to Jane, but free, because you already paid for it through your generous tax contribution to our country. NCII, which is the National Company for Intensive Intervention, has free courses, modules on all of this, and teaches you and gives you a link to how to like put data into a chart and get it all out. And it's totally free. I use it with my graduate students. You get a certificate when you finish the module. It is a treasure trove. And you just need to sign up, and you can probably know more than most by doing these modules. I don't know if that was probably way more than you asked me, but
Thank you.
yeah.
That was helpful.
Thanks, Maureen. And there was another comment in the chat. It wasn't so much a question, but thank you. You made it all seem so logical while also recognizing it being a complicated process.
Oh, I appreciate that. It is logical. It's logical when you understand it. And I think that we need to do a better job of helping all partners who are at the table have a better understanding. Because then we can communicate. And I think that your question, Renee, about, the data, there's no point to collecting data to just sit around and admire it. If you're not going to use it, then you shouldn't be collecting it. And so we need to make sure that the assessments that our students are being given have reliability and validity, mean something, that they assess what so they have content, what we call content validity. They assess what we are thinking they're assessing. And I think that we need to feel very comfortable questioning the assessments that are being used, because not all assessments that are being used are the appropriate assessments. And as a teacher, I should be able to tell you why I'm using the tool that I'm using, and what it's helping me do, because the data are to help me as a teacher inform my instruction with your child. It's not a postmortem. It should be an active influencer of the design of instruction.
One of the things that we have seen when districts do graph the progress is that the goal line isn't always part of the graph. And that's kind of what you're talking about, right? Is the trend line might be going upness a little bit, but if it's not trending towards meeting the goal line, it's not enough progress.
And Jane, that's such a great point. And I'm sure most of you know this term, but for those of you who don't, that's where we can see the Matthew effect in living color. So the Matthew effect is a term that was taken from the Bible, where there's a passage in Matthew where it says the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And so the goal line is showing you what, students where they should be going. Okay. And then the student's trajectory, let's see how I can do this. The student's learning trajectory is this bottom line. I call that the alligator. So your student might be, if they're not making enough, if there's not enough go upness, the difference between your child and their typical peers, where they should be, just gets larger and larger. And that's the Matthew effect. The rich, students who don't have challenges, get richer, and the poor, meaning the students who have challenges, get poorer. And then over time, the gap becomes like insurmountable. And people give up, like I can't do it anymore. How much more can we give them? Well, we can give students, it's not always more, but it's the right support. And so we need to make sure when we look at those data next time that the data are being used to inform the instruction, not just collected and then students get whatever it is that is typical special ed practice. If there is such a thing, that's a ridiculous comment, but they're not getting, it's supposed to be individualized instruction. And individualized instruction is only determined by the data. So it's like a medical model. I have been to a PPT recently where somebody said, well, we're using Orton Gillingham. It's the gold standard. Well, Orton Gillingham is wonderful, but penicillin is the gold standard, but not if you have a brain tumor, right? I mean, you have to make sure that you're looking at the data and you're aligning the intervention with what the data are telling you. That's why I say data are not a 4-letter word. It's the story. It tells the story of your student.
And I think using the model will help with knowing what the data is. Looking at the model will really help where the focus should be. Right? That's the purpose of all of that. Well, thank you very much. I think it was very, very informative for a person like myself who doesn't know a lot about reading. And I learned about kids with dyslexia a little bit and what might be their need, but I also work a lot with families with kids with autism, and I see where that need might show up a lot too. So
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to part 2. We'll see everybody in January that wants to come back. Thanks.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Ruby.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Stop the recording.